Hello there, it's Mubali. Recently, some very nice friends and subscribers who've been following my videos have reached out to me and asked me to talk about how I go about some of my atmospheres and some of the techniques I use for creating atmospheres. And I figured like the best thing to do, separate from the from the ground up videos, would be to just like make a couple of videos talking about some concepts on how I create atmospheres. And this video and the next couple of videos or so that will focus on this particular topic will be focusing primarily on synthesis forms of creating atmospherics. And I think that this first video will just focus primarily on the basic concepts. We'll talk about what an atmosphere is and what it's used for, the benefits of having it in a composition, as well as some of the basic characteristics of what creates sort of atmospheric and pad-like effects or pad-like sounds, and some general methods of accomplishing them. These techniques will be initially synthesis-based, where you'll be using virtual synthesizers or physical synthesizers. These concepts function for hardware or software. It really does not matter. And even when you think about the context of using wavetable synthesis, it's even sample-based, because wavetables are really short samples. So they're just being used as the oscillator, as opposed to like a virtual analog situation, or like, an analog signal path or something, like an analog oscillator or virtual analog oscillator, or a software virtual oscillator. So let's begin. Let's talk about what an atmosphere is. What an atmosphere is usually a type of sound that has a characteristic of being sustained, where it'll be a long part. It'll usually employ longer notes, maybe not as much melodic movement as a actual melody. Sometimes atmospheres are used to provide harmony to a song. And what they're used for, at least in the terms of how it's applied in most dance music beyond the musical application, is to provide depth in the overall mix. We have to think about, when you're thinking about things as far as the depth of the mix, you have to think about things in contrast and in dynamic ranges to a certain degree, or dynamics over a whole. And when you're thinking about depth, you're thinking about extremes. You won't know if something is in your face or very far away if there's nothing to orient you from it. You need basically you always need a point of reference to judge the distance of something else from. So, for instance, you can see a nearby tree, but you don't necessarily know how far away it is unless you have other things to compare that height to, or to compare that distance to. If everything was just an open plain with no scenery around it, nothing, and there's just these objects there, and you couldn't tell if one was more in front of the other or behind the other, you would just assume that that was the extent of your world. However, atmospherics create this backing feeling and this expanse that allows the rest of the elements to also coexist inside of this general space. And it's really used to establish spatial dynamics, and really can fill out a mix very, very well. You can, like all things, it can be overdone, can be overcrowded. You can have a pad that'll clutter up the mix from time to time, but as you learn when, how, what to employ, aside from, just EQing it out, but just from a compositional aspect and a sound design aspect, you'll start getting a better understanding of the type of pad that you might need for a particular section, or the type of atmosphere that might fit the best, and maybe be able to synthesize it to the way that you want to, or arrange it to where that element takes up the proper amount of space that it needs to. So what are the characteristics of pads? Pads are usually slower sounding as far as like articulation. They're not staccato patterns, they're not ostinatos either. They're just these long, slowly developing textures that really fit within the confines of the rest of the elements that are present, and sometimes usually aren't considered to be a center stage thing, so they might be mixed a little bit quieter, or they employ different audio effects based upon delay that will give it more of a substantial bit of width, and even like a little bit more of sonic depth by messing around with some of the frequencies, by using reverb or delays or chorus or flange or some along those lines. Or we'll talk about how to go about some chorusing effects without having to employ a chorus and without having to employ a delay even. We'll just we're going to do an old technique called the Reese. It's meant for drum and bass music, but it also makes a good pad as well. Like, it's a good kind of brassy pad feel. So the slow expansion and having a very interesting sonic characteristic that is also evolving is the key to making any sort of atmospheric content feel like it has life and not feel static. Because if you have something that's just very static, just hanging in the mix, it can also pull down the mix, and you lose interest in the sound, so you're not really listening to it as much, but it's still occupying that frequency range, so it might mask other sounds that might want to take precedence. So if you're always keeping the pad moving and having interplay, but it's still far enough away, it still fills the holes that it needs to, while the other sounds that are supposed to dominate that certain particular frequency ranges can come through and basically mask some of the elements on the pad that no longer need to be there or have been EQ'd out or whatever. So how do we go about this? I started with operator, and we're going to start off with a very basic pad sound, and then we'll do something a little more involved with the operator. We're not going to go FM this time, even though FM pads are definitely very fun, and you can definitely apply these techniques to any synthesizer you get your hands on, as long as they have some sort of control that you can either automate or modulate. As long as they've got controls you can automate and modulate over time, and you can draw an envelope, you can do this. So we're going to start with a very basic sound, and you can do wonderful things with sine waves, and if you're going to do more FM based, I would probably start with sine waves to get those complex timbres that way. But we're just going to start with the traditional saw pad. Since we're eventually going to turn this into a Reese sort of sound, we're going to do it based off saw anyway. So the first thing we got to bear in mind is the envelope. Now, there is no master amplitude envelope for this particular situation that I can see, which is fine. It just would save time. But in this particular case, it doesn't necessarily matter. So I'm going to set a pretty long attack. Let's say about 4.35 is fine. And let's set a pretty substantial release time. Well, I'm set a release time of like, I don't know, 2 seconds. So this should give us a very basic sound. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just double click and drop a clip in here. C2s, since it's not in the context of a song, we're not going to care about keys, because we're not doing a melody right now. We're doing a sustained drone almost. And in fact, like, a lot of pads could be considered drones. I mean, I make a lot of drones in a lot of respects. I just, they are always shifting and swirling and stuff like that. So maybe it's not as much pad creation if it's not having a harmonic or a melodic movement to it. But drones are also fun, and I like them. So it's irrelevant. So let's make this an 8-bar thing. And instead of dragging it out like this, we're just going to go over here and hit legato. And we're going to force the legato. It goes all the way to the end. Easy peasy. So it's going selected to the operator. Right now it's just got a simple 4 seconds in, 2-second release. And it's going to sound pretty boring. Giving this some extra room so we can hear the tail of the release stage of the pad, which is very important as well. So it's not necessarily the most interesting sound, right? But we've got slow developing movement, so we're not going to hear it when it initially comes in, which means it's not going to initially grab our attention. It'll settle into its place slowly while other things are going on, which is helpful. I'm going to, since we're going to start with the very basic, and we're going to start with a very basic oscillator just to show you how to do this no matter what you have, and then the more interesting oscillators you have, that you can modulate the timbre in a different method, the more fun it becomes. But we start with the basics and we move forward from there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn on the LFO, set the rate a bit, turn up that amount full blast, and that's going to control the filter just a tiny bit. And we're also going to move this cutoff down. We have like, it was like 4 seconds, so let's just do like a 5, and instead of the sustain, we'll do a long decay that we can slope out. And then we go back to make. It's important whenever you're making envelopes for sound and synths, then you have a longer release. You want to make sure that all your other envelopes also have a release that's as long or longer than the release that you have for this. Because you'll get some, at the tail end of the note, when the release stage happens from the amplitude, the rate of change between the other envelopes will be faster, and you'll hear a noticeable, like, quick return. It'll sound weird, and you might have to, like, fade it out. But if you just make sure you set your release times to be relatively long, then it'll be much easier for you to deal with. And I think what I'm going to do is, okay, so I'm going to give this envelope an amount to, and you know what? Let's just loop it. I think, right? No. No, let's just loop it. Let's see if that helps. We'll loop it. Oh, 4 seconds? We'll see. I don't know. I don't even know if it's going to work. We'll see. Probably not, because if we make it short. Okay, that's what we'll do. We'll make this shorter so it kind of seems like an LFO. And we'll see if that works. And we will also engage this pitch envelope, but it will not control the pitch. We'll have it control the LFO speed by a bit. And this, we will make the initial 0, give it a 100% peak, because we're controlling the destination amount there. So this one we're going to make like, this one I'll make like that. Decay is going to be somewhere like there. We'll round out that curve like this, make it bubble out a bit. Change the slope. And go back, set that release time to be nice and long. And we're going to have that modulate. Can't. I would normally have this modulate something. I'm not going to have it do pitch because that's just too cliche. I've already got some filter modulation happening. Oh, we can do the filter envelope amount. Oh, we can do the LFO amount. Let's do that. All right. And we'll mess with that amount. Oh, well, that's not really. I mean, yeah. I mean, it'll kind of help. So we're gonna lower that amount. No, let's not. Let's not do that. Let's do. I would do time, but it's kind of pointless for this particular situation. You know what? Yeah, let's do it. Let's do the filter morph. Let's do a filter morph. And we'll just change this to the morphing filter. That might be interesting. Let's see. See, that seems like that's got a lot more interesting things that are going on with it. At least a lot more interesting than just the plain sawtooth without, like, much else happening. So another thing I want to show you is if you only have one oscillator and you just happen to have something where you can do a little bit of unison, and you can do a little bit of detuning, that's also very handy. Here's what we're going to do, a little bit of spreading on it to give a little detune. Let's hear it. Maybe. Instead of the filter morph, we will actually have it modulate the cutoff. I think that's a much better idea. especially with the spread on. Now, I'm going to show you how to do the Reese really quickly, because it doesn't really take too long, but you do need at least 3 oscillators. I'm going to show you how to do this in 3. It's an old technique that's used in bass music that originally came from Detroit techno. At least I believe it's Detroit techno. This is where it came from. So the way that this is done is you basically take a copy of the same oscillator, and we're going to duplicate this, but not really duplicate it. We would basically take identical clones of the same oscillator type, but their pitch would be offset by, let's say this is the fundamental, this is going to be the lowest one. We drop this down by an octave. Then these two would be an octave higher, and they're going to be offset. I'm going to offset it by 30 here. And something like that here. Bring these up to minus 12. Minus 12. And then we get the envelope settings right. 4350 and 2100, I think, right? Yep. Wish I could just copy this to that, to that, to that. I feel like I should be able to. I just can't remember. Gotta get back on my live chops. 4530. Wait, no. 4350. 4350. 2100. The envelopes work based upon the millisecond standing, so you can't just type in like 2 seconds. You gotta type like 2000 milliseconds. It is what it is, no worries. You just have to know your math, not a big deal. Okay, so now I set these, I mean, just for the purposes of this particular sound, I'm going to have them be identical, but I definitely encourage you to fool around with all of these settings, play with different oscillators, mess around with these partials. You can get really, really, really interesting sounds just by messing with a few, just by changing a few parameters, like the oscillator type, or messing with like some of the partials in the oscillator, or even drawing your own, you know, totally. But the detuning is really what makes it interesting, because it's basically you've got your fundamental, and then you've got an offset version of the octave above, and these guys are messing with each other and also messing with this. So it creates this thicker sound in theory. In practice, you will hear it. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to go back and change this back to a low-pass filter as well, because there's no reason for this purpose to like do the morph. Although you definitely can, and if you want to do more like bass music, like growl, snarly stuff, like that would be a good way to go about it. But for this purpose, here we go. And I forgot something. When you engage these other oscillators, you have to make sure that they are not being automatically fed to your modulators. Turn off the D as well. All right. Let's try this again. maybe I was doing something wrong. It just doesn't quite sound. Oh, I know why. Because I was actually making everything modulate, and I was trying to treat it like an FM. And that could have been interesting, but that's not the sound that we want. Now let's try this one more time. Now we change the configuration to where they are all playing parallel to each other, which is what we want. We didn't want to rig it up as an FM matrix. We want to treat this as a up to four oscillator synth. Yeah. I also forgot I gotta turn down the volume. Let's turn it down by 12 decibels. Let's see if that is better. Okay. Now let's unpack the beating that's happening between these two oscillators, as well as the beating that's happening between here, is thickening the sound and creating a chorusy sound of effect without us having to employ a chorus. It's kind of flanging a little bit, and that's cool. It makes it sound bigger and thicker, and this is one of those sounds that has been employed as a bass sound, a lead sound, an atmospheric pad sound. I use this for pads sometimes. I also have used it for leads, but in this case, yeah. And this is basically the Reese. So then we can just turn up the spread amount. So we do have this sound, and it's cool, but it's still not quite fully, it's not fully super Atmo like we want. It's a pad, and it's kind of big, but it's not, like, if it sits back in the mix, it'll be okay, but it still is a little dry sounding, and we need to make it sound a little less dry. So the best way to go about that is to use delay-based effects, and one of the common things to go to is, of course, the reverb, and so we will use reverb in this application. I'm going to put it back after here for the time being. In the context of a song, normally I would probably set up a return and have all my atmospherics go through the same reverb with the same settings to save processor, but this is just for explanation purposes. I'll make a really long pre-delay. How about that? And to work in it, it's 2 seconds. Okay. 2 seconds. Okay, let's say reverb time, we'll make it like 3 times, and so we will make that like 20. Just trying to, like, at 120, it's like, two cycles a second, so it's, yeah, never mind. My math is, I usually use a calculator for this. I know 150 BPM, but, it doesn't really matter. You'll have to use some math to help calculate your reverb times better, and I'd watch a few other YouTube videos. In fact, I'll probably eventually do so myself and disseminate with you guys what I've learned from there at some point. So I'm not even like certain about the settings I'm going to use. It doesn't really matter at this point, but the concept is it's going to give it some depth and kind of make it sit. It would make it sit further back in the mix by diffusing out some of the sound. We'll give it a little more diffusion, and it'll make it sound larger than what it normally is. So here's Here's what it should sound like. All right, not necessarily so bad. Then, of course, you can always throw on some delay, or, you know, if you want to, like, give more chorus, for more movement to the sound, you put a chorus on it, and then, like, delay and all that stuff. But for the basics, that is, in a nutshell, the very, very basics of how to create a pad based upon the simple necessities that it needs. It needs movement, but gradual, slow movements are ideal. It needs to kind of gradually fill space and have something interesting that's going on, but not so interesting that it's completely distracting from the other elements. I'm trying to separate atmospherics from the more effects sounds, because the more effects, weird sounds, they're more meant to kind of draw attention. I mean, there's times where this isn't necessarily the case, but some of the more sci-fi sounding, more one-shot effects, they're kind of meant to, like, make you notice them. So we're going to start with the stuff that's supposed to be behind that isn't necessarily as noticeable unless in the context of the whole, which is very important. So we've done with this with the operator, and I've shown you how to basically go about it with making the Reese, which is a more complex oscillator than just the single oscillator. But we'll quickly show a single oscillator. Turn on the reverb again. So yes, fun. And that's all with one or up to 3 oscillators that are just basic wave shapes. You can just use any of the basic wave shapes, mix and match. You can get some very interesting combinations and therefore some interesting pad sounds. Now, one of my fun things that I like to do is mess with wavetables. Because wavetables, you can change the timbre of the oscillator very smoothly, and you can also have some very wild shapes. So let's do something weird. Let's use complex, and we'll start. I'm gonna let it play, and in this case, we're not gonna worry about the release stage just yet. I'm gonna let it play, and I'm gonna dial in some sounds. I'm not gonna give you a complete complete walkthrough on this synth, because there are quite a few other tutorials already out in YouTube land and on the digital media world that go into how wavetable synths work, as well as how the Ableton wavetable synth works. But you basically have all these different waveforms, and they change over time, and so you can cycle through these different wave shapes. And sometimes they smoothly transition to each other. So you can get very interesting sounds that you can't get with any of the basic oscillators, or some of these are combinations of basic oscillators that have been mangled in other ways that end up becoming this. And so they take that and create it, turn that into a waveform, so you can use that as a basis. Very nice form of abstraction. And you make something really complex out of a whole bunch of simple sources, and then you boil it down to be used as a very simple tool to be combined again. it also is, it seems like when I was changing it, like changing the change through everything, it doesn't seem very smooth. So that might not be ideal for this particular first pad sound, but we can also play with that later when we do more like strange effects and weird trippy sounds like that. Let's see here. Let's just on the sync. Let's just we'll just grab. Let's look at Amber real quick. The timbre gets brighter as the higher you go up, and it gets duller as you go down, which is cool to know. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make the amplitude envelope, and we'll make it like 3 seconds, full sustain, release of 249. And we'll make a second envelope that will loop. A third envelope that will not loop, that'll be nice, gradual, and long, and it'll stay with let's see, something like that. Let's check the release time on it. All right, and we also have LFOs. One will make normal, one we will make chaotic. Slow rate, I think we'll offset the timing, offset the phase on it, which is also very nice to do. Maybe we'll make it yeah, you know what? We'll make it slowly fade in over a couple of seconds as well, so we can have a nice gradual. And this one, I was hoping for noise, honestly, but nope, guess not. Oh well, that's a pity. But yeah, oh well. So we're not going to do that. We'll just turn into a strange looking triangle. Or no, that's just oh, it's shaped into the saw. So let's try that. Looks weird. I like it. All right. Now I just set up the modulators, but I haven't really routed them to anything yet. So let's see. We'll just use a standard low pass filter for now. Actually, yeah. Well, no, screw that. We'll morph. Give it some resonance. Start it relatively low, like there. And since the cutoff is most recently selected, I'm going to go to the matrix. This is going to give... Okay, so the second envelope is the looping one. Third one is the one that goes up and stays up. So I'm just going to bring it to here. And then we got LFOs there. And we'll do that there. I think. Maybe that's too much. That's probably too much. Let's try that. So that's going to be controlled by all that stuff. We're going to take the position, which is this right here. And we're also we're going to go the opposite direction for that one. And even, like, we're going to try that. I don't actually know what's going to happen yet, but we'll see. And I'm also going to use the amplitude envelope as well, because that's also a nice gradual ramp. And we'll just play with just this to start with. And we're going to do the filter morph and have that controlled by the LFO. That's also kind of affected. You notice I'm not doing any extreme amounts of modulation. I think in this particular case, subtlety is probably the key. Because you want this to be interesting and move, but not be too distracting as well. So let's see what we got. One of the things I like to do when I use wavetable synths is I usually like to drop the octave down really low because you can get some more interesting textural sounds from there, but we'll just drop it down 2 octaves, see what we get first, and then see from there. Nice. That would be one of the type of atmospheric type sound effects that I would use in one of my tracks, for sure. For sure. And we're only using just one oscillator right now. We still have another one. So let's use it. And we'll make this sound, I don't know. We'll do squash. Let's see what happens. And this one will be controlled. You know what? We'll start up here this time. This one is gonna, the amplitude's gonna take it down pretty far. It's gonna take it back up. And, you know, they'll take it up and take it down as well. It's be modulating a little bit, and this is gonna be a little bit more. And yeah, so let's see what we have. So as you can tell, there's a lot of possibilities with modulation, with a robust modulation matrix, as well as the ability to alter or to cycle through the timbre and even affect the timbre of the waveform. You can get some really wild stuff by, it's 5 modulation sources, sure, but it's the fact that these are all combined working together to make some wacky stuff. It's what really makes it really cool, So, this is basically a synthesis walkthrough on how you would design atmospherics. This particular one has a lot more modulation going on, which makes it more crazy and more psychedelic sounding, but it still occupies many of the same principles as before. It's got a long attack, including long release, but we didn't really use the release part for this part. But it's got the long attack to help gradually bring it into the world, into your environment, and it's got movement to keep the sound interesting, but this sounds like more an effects sound, one of my more trippy effects, like less of a pad-oriented atmosphere, but more like a more psychedelic sound, but not too chaotic to the point where like it's going crazy pitch all over the place as well, and like it's making a melody is drawing a whole bunch of attention to itself. It's drawing some attention to itself for sure, and especially once like this thing needs a delay. In fact, just for fun, just the simplest of simple. No, we're not using the simplest of simple delay. We will use the echo because we will double verb it. Because why not, eh? So. So, yeah, we just nerded out and experimented for a little bit, but the wavetable synthesis can be, I mean, there's still all these other waveforms here and all these other collections, so there's so much that you can do with basic modulation. So we're not doing too much. I mean, we are doing a bit, but we're modulating as many parameters as we can, but it's nothing too ridiculous most of the time. And it's just simple stuff. It's just a couple of envelopes and a couple of LFOs, not doing any crazy random stuff or anything like that. It's all kind of slow stuff. So a little bit goes a long way. So this is where I think we're going to leave things for now. And when we come back, I'm going to show you some of these same concepts, but we're going to use VCV racks, so we really get down to the anatomy of building these sounds from nothing, from scratch, from zero. So thank you very much for watching. I hope this helps you, and feel free if I got something wrong or if I need to clarify something a little bit better. Please feel free to let me know. I'd be more than happy to help you out. Either I'll post another video or I can help you directly. Not a problem. Have a great one. Till next time. Peace.